Buongiorno amici, sono le 10 del mattino a Redmond, quindi è il momento della revisione della API.NET. Which is weird, because I usually just say API review in English. That's what happens when you cheat and use a script. Alright, welcome back. We have a whole lot more things on the docket since the last time we were here. But we're gonna go in a order that sounds random, but isn't, because I believe I'm first up with continuing what we talked about last time, but I would like more people here before we finish talking about it. So, first up is make opcode.stack change public, 9er3419er. Booyah.
Yeah, so there is internal API that expresses stack change reference, and I'm asking to make it public, probably with public property, and there were some questions about the naming the property, but other than that, it looks like I had some offline discussion with the folks, and it looks like there's no other issue with that. So I have put several naming options in the alternative design.
Okay, and so does a person who's working with Refemit have any idea what this delta is measuring?
Yeah, I mean, it's evolution stack delta, but if that's not clear, maybe stack transition delta or
Well, I just don't know. Like, is this always 0, 1, or -1? Or is it like 12? And if it's 12, is that bytes or frames or gigawatts or what?
It's kind of index of the stack, so it will be not index, actually, difference with the indexes. So kind of maximum it will be 3, minimum will be minus. Our maximum will be 2, our minimum will be -3 between those numbers.
What does it do for call, since call can pop an arbitrary number of arguments from the stack based on the signature?
That's right, yeah. For method call, it can be even more.
Okay.
More minus, yeah.
So if it's just push, it will be +1. If it's push, it's +2. If it's push pop, it's 0. And
Yep.
if it's something like a call, it will be minus however many arguments are popped from the stack.
Right.
Okay.
But
would it
this
be
is
correct to call this stack size delta? Or does that not help? I think I understand based on the conversation now what it represents, though, at least.
Yeah, I think I slightly understand it more and can't think of what it does sound sort of like it's a unitless thing. But since this is on the struct opcode, I assume it's not like for call. This is going to be a number. It's not going to know how many arguments it is. It's going to present.
Right. It will just express the opcode difference, but for the arguments, it needs to be. I need to calculate within the IO generator. It needs to be calculate the arguments separately. It's only difference for the opcodes, stack changes for the opcodes.
Fair enough.
Someone in the comments suggested stack depth delta. I don't know if the evaluation is necessary. I guess that's trying to communicate that when you evaluate this operation, that's how much the stack changes.
Well, no, the formal terminology for the IL stack is known as the evaluation stack.
Oh, I see. Okay, that makes sense.
Right.
Wordy.
And yeah, and so it's literally the delta done to the evaluation stack, which is that the stack is basically number of objects that are on the stack, where object can be anything. It could be an int, it could be an actual object, could be a pointer.
Fair enough. On the one hand, it doesn't feel like a good name. On the other hand, I don't have anything better. So,
Have we used delta in any other API? Out of curiosity.
that's an interesting question. As opposed to change.
Yeah, I mean, I hadn't really thought through the alternatives, but I was just curious.
So like time zone adjustment rules have daylight delta and base UTC offset delta.
Yeah, I think delta's fine. I was just, yeah.
I'm just looking to see other deltas. Those seem to be the main ones under system. Like there's some win forms, like on column header drag delta, but all right. Any other feedback? Cool. Okay, add a protected factory method for creating label and IL generator and abstract out local builder 90349 or 7.
So for new assembly builder implementation that can save the assembly into the file, I'm implementing a new IL generator, and we have abstracted most of the reflection image APIs before, but these two kind of leftovers from that abstraction and also need to be abstracted so that I can create instances or override the needed methods, etc. So first is local builder. You can just same as the all other APIs we have abstracted. I need to make it abstract and protected local protected constructor, and one field that is not exposed is the method info, which also add apps for which we can also add abstract property for that.
Other than the constructor, are there any other protected members on IL generator?
On IL generator, for the label one? No.
Just looks like everything's public except for the constructor,
Right.
which is protected.
Right, only the constructor protected except this one.
I feel like protected static is unusual, but
Hey.
it's all you need, I guess.
Yep.
The label is not supposed to be created outside of the alternate. I mean, I was thinking to make the label constructor public, but doesn't make sense to create anyone creating a label using. It should be tied to the IO generator, so that's why I make this protected factory method.
Yeah. So assuming that local builder is building a local variable, it the current constructor says the method info is already defined and pass it in the constructor, but you've changed it to be an abstract property. Shouldn't it still just be the protected constructor once the method info is a constructor parameter?
No, because the instance is not well. Guess it can be protected. Get to two. Just
No.
the
I just
local.
like this should not be a virtual property, and it should be the method info should be passed in the constructor.
You mean the protected constructor?
That the protected constructor should take the method info.
No.
Why not? The method has to already exist because you're trying to add locals to it.
I'm not sure what you mean, but the implementation, local builder implementation, will have the instances of the method info, method, and local type, etc. But the local builder itself will not have those. So you need to pass that to the protected constructor.
Right, but like, there we go. Like this seems much more correct.
Why don't you need the other
No.
parameters on the internal constructor?
I added the abstract property for method because it doesn't exist for the local variable, the parent type, and the local variable parent type has properties for other like local index, local type, and independent values. And only one value is not exposed, that is the method info.
Right, that makes sense to me, right? Like all the other parameters to the internal constructor are virtual properties. So this is just consistent with that, right?
Right.
Are they?
Yeah, on the base local variable info. That's why you don't need it, right? Like that's why this new constructor without any parameters can work.
Right.
Because you can just override all the properties.
I guess. I mean, this is a terrible, terrible design. Because presumably the method shouldn't change once it's set, and this design, every time you call the property, it can return a different answer.
I mean, I don't necessarily disagree, but then there's
I mean, like all that I know about this type is what's on the screen. So the notion of this went from a constructor parameter to it's an abstract property is a bad change. But if it's actually a more consistent change, then I guess it's an okay change. And so, yeah, so all these other things are properties defined in the type already.
Right.
So now it's up to the super type to define them.
Yeah, and the base type also has an empty protected constructor like this, so it is nothing if not consistent.
Yeah, so presumably this means you're deleting a bunch of properties off of this type as well.
Just moving to the runtime implementation.
Right. Which will break reflection, but we don't care. And break or might break ready to run, but hopefully it deals with that.
Break generics. Previously, local builder worked as a generic type parameter. In some cases, and I believe when it's abstract, it won't work in all of the same cases.
Yeah, I'm just thinking more of so not just the changing sealed to abstract, but since the type was sealed, ready to run would have known it didn't need to do call vert because it would know where the virtual dispatch is going to go, and it may have even inlined it. And now, I guess if it inlines it, that's fine. But now there's no method to call there.
Yeah, ready to run has versioning bubble though, so it will see that there was a change here, and it will throw away the old method.
Okay.
If need be.
Yeah.
And I guess the generics don't matter because the constructor wasn't public, so it already wasn't valid for something constrained to new.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that was just me thinking through that there are changes not listed on the screen, and are the ones not listed on the screen going to impact anything? And it sounds like no. Specifically because this is sealed going into abstract, so no one could have inherited it, no one could have assumed it was there, but again, sealed means call verts could have turned into calls, but as long as ready to run smart enough to deal with that, then we're good. Alright, and I assume labels have always had an int-based identifier?
Right.
Just it wasn't previously exposed because it didn't need to be?
No, it was used there is exposed internally, and iAlternative was using it internally, but
Right.
now it's abstract. Not abstract. I couldn't reach out the correlate iAlternative or correlate internal things. So.
But today you could just call get hashcode and you would get it.
Yeah, that's a good contract.
Yeah.
Oh, and is local method the right name for this property? Because
The properties in local variable all has local. I think that's why.
well, but
name it.
I feel like local index, and I don't know anything about anything, but just based on the name, I assume it's like a positional number of this local, and local type is the type of this local, but this is not the method of this local, it's the method declaring this local.
Right.
So it feels like it should just be method.
Yeah. Okay.
Does anybody want to keep local, remove local?
I vote method. by the way, your screen hasn't moved in a while. We're supposed to like comment on like a writing or whatever, but
No, I'm writing off screen.
okay, cool.
All right. We discussed property or constructor parameter versus abstract property, and then we renamed it, and otherwise everything is as it was. Boom.
Thank you.
Thank you. Still don't think we have quite the right people for the cert one, so accepting nominations.
The new time span from overloads. Just take integers.
Okay. New time span dot from overloads which take integers 9038900.
Yeah, so the general premise here is TimeSpan exposes several from methods. They take double. Tarek and I have both spent considerable time over the past few releases explaining to people why all of the things they're expecting these APIs to do aren't going to do what they expect them to do because of how double works. Likewise, we've spent time trying to fix various rounding issues while preserving performance and meeting other requirements. And this is one of those cases where if we had a time machine and the right people on the team at the time, we probably wouldn't have exposed these double overloads at all, just because of the types of problems they incur. So the general premise here is we should expose some new overloads that explicitly take integers, much like the constructors do. But we expose them on the name method so people have very clear context as to what behavior they're getting. So they've got clear context as to what each parameter is. And so that we can take advantage of defaultable parameters so that they can still specify the additional precision if desired, but they are not forced to do so. And so I've got them ordered from most parameters to least parameters here, but the top one is from days. You have to specify a day amount, and then otherwise you can optionally specify the smaller increments. This will result in much more efficient code. It will result in users getting the exact time span that they expected to get. The only real consideration is additional consideration is whether we want to have an analyzer pointing users towards using these over the double overloads, or whether we want to even consider obsoleting them because of the problems they cause. Notably, we can't. Go ahead, Stephen.
Stefan, sorry. So
Stefan.
about the use case here with the analyzer and all that. So assuming I'm using the double overloads because I have a double and not like 6 ints to start with, like how am I expected to get the 6 integers in a way that's like better than just passing the double to from days? Or is there some expectation that like I'm going to be doing some manual string parsing and pulling out these components myself or something?
If what you have is a double, then there's not really something better you can use. It's more for the cases like you're doing from seconds 101.832, in which case the analyzer can trivially get the individual parts of the literal and convert it to from seconds 101, 832. That way you get exactly 832 milliseconds rather than 831.8 0.999 milliseconds.
I see. Yeah, the literal
Yeah.
case makes sense.
Because I was gonna say, if you do like timespan dot total days, and then -1, and then bring that back to a new time span, like that's having an analyzer tell you, I'm sorry, you get to break this down into its components, seems bad.
Yep. Although notably, you shouldn't be doing that anyways. You should probably do timespan subtract timespan from days 1.
Sure.
Which we could potentially recognize and tell users to do instead, because it's both faster and safer.
Chat asks, if you have timespan from days and an integer value, when you recompile now, that'll change to calling the int, or at least it will after I tell you that you need more overloads here. And so then there's a question of, is that going to cause a change in precision in the answer? And
yes, and that's covered under the additional considerations. There are, particularly for from days, if you pass a total number of ticks or time value that is more than 28.55 years, you will now result in potentially a different answer depending on what that exact scaled value would be. This is a case where we theoretically could improve or fix it for the double precision overload, but that comes at a significant cost to performance, which we've not been able to make so far, because then users have no alternative and we're regressing core workloads. Once we have new overloads that are precise and faster, then we have the ability longer term to look at making fixes so that there is less error consideration for the double overload. But you can never remove all of the error, just because double can't exactly represent every fractional sequence.
But in like the main use case, if this is like mostly for people writing literals, like they're not going to write literals that are going to push the limits of double, like meaningfully.
Potentially yes, potentially no. Someone could just say, I want 50 years from now. And
they specify that in days?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
no one's going to write out 50 years.
You can't use years. Timespan doesn't have years overloads because
right.
Because of.
I'm just saying, when you add 50 years, you're either using a calendar and actually counting, or you're using 365, or you're doing 365.25 and truncating, or whatever. But
people multiply, actually, and that's how you can get to that situation. Like, they'll just do the literal multiplication, like, in their programs.
Right, like, but you're picking a number for years. So yes, if you did 50 times 365, you'd be 6 days short. Just take that to be true. And no more than that. Whatever. I don't need to know. And but yeah, so somebody could put in a big integer and be off, I guess.
But yeah, I mean, it has to be way bigger than 50 times 365. Yeah.
But yeah, but if you enter 50 times 365 days, how much are you off by? Like a second?
Not at all for something that small, right? Like,
well, I thought he said 28 years.
Well within a double. Well, not from days. That makes no sense.
Yeah. So when does
such a small number that fits well within the what is it, Mantissa, whatever?
No, it doesn't fit, because you have 365 days, which is multiplied by 864 billion ticks, which then pushes it past 2 to the power of 52, which then causes loss of data.
If you do from days on the double, like, we could fix that. Like, if I do from days...
The issue is we can't fix it because it is a major performance regression.
I have a question. Like, why don't we use decimal for that?
Because decimal is even slower.
But like you said, you use it for constants, right?
Decimal is not actually a constant. It doesn't have, for example, JIT support.
No.
It's only.
I mean to use the time span you create in the as the constant in general, right?
Right. That wouldn't be fast.
Like that. Yeah, like that shouldn't matter. Like if you define constants using this API, right?
It would matter because decimal isn't constant foldable at the JIT level. C# doesn't have const expression support.
I mean,
and
yet,
so
right?
the from days potentially ever, and from days ends up having to execute at runtime, and because it has to execute at runtime, it can't constant fold something like a decimal input, whereas for integers it can trivially constant fold it and produce an actual JIT time constant.
Right, but so what's the rough scale of the error in magnitude when you pass a total input that exceeds the whatever 28 years? So if you say
So
50-ish years from days, are you off by a microsecond, a millisecond, a week?
I'd have to go look at the math again, but essentially anything past 2 to the power of 52 is off by an integral value of 1. Anything after 2 to the power of 53 is off by an integral value of 2, then 4, then 8, all the way up to several thousand units.
But those
by
are
the time
in,
you get to 2 to the power of 64.
But that's an integer number of ticks.
Okay, Tanner. I just did time span from days 50 times 365, which calls the double overload, total days. It gives me 18,250, which is not accounting for. So, but like that's exactly correct, right? I did 50 times 365.
There's some that will be exactly correct, and there's others that will not. It depends on the value produced, among other factors. And like I said,
those
Tarek
numbers
and I
are
have
way
had to
too
spend.
slow. Like you're saying, it starts at like 30 years and it just gets bigger,
Right?
Like
because the 86 billion, like you'll lose the precision of one tick, but your precision didn't include one tick. When you add that to some other time span, you may now lose the tick that you tried to add. But when you're multiplying by 86 billion, you get, times a billion before you notice any loss of precision.
And the way people use this in practice often includes fractional parts to the data. So they might say something like 10.5 days.
But we're talking of if you've written from and then a literal that can be interpreted as an int. So it would need to be a number of days that results in a lack of precision in the billion ticks range.
Potentially. When you're looking at just days, there may end up being no chance for an error in that case. When you're looking at the total scope of days, hours, minutes, seconds, milliseconds, microseconds, and all the ways that users do specify the data, there is chances for...
That required somebody actually changing their code. We're asking here, calling from x where x is an integer may produce different results. And so the question is, what's the scale of the error? And if we think that it's actually impossible, that 2 to the 32 minus 1, no, 31 minus 1 days, because of the number of trailing zeros that don't matter in the number in Sigfig, ends up not mattering, that you can't actually blow out the 2 to the 52 semantic range. Because I don't think you can.
Someone would have to sit down and actually work through the math with all the edge cases.
Fair enough.
But I think in general they are edge cases, and you end up with a more precise result.
Right.
In the worst case.
Because yeah, I agree that the
I
exponent
see.
won't be 0 anymore, but I think it won't matter for almost any reasonable number of days, possibly including all of them.
I mean, it could end up mattering like at like once you start multiplying huge values, like, but you'll quickly get into a point where you would overflow integers, and then doubles end up being better anyway. Like once you start getting to those very large values.
Yeah, because I mean, really, the question is how many semantic bits are there in the constant of ticks per day? Because if there are fewer than 20, then that times 2 to the 32 can't exceed 2 to the 52.
Right. Like can't like a double can represent any like I mean double, how many bits does it give up to like the exponent stuff? Can it just like represent any 32-bit integer?
Yeah.
Yes, it
Like
can represent
exactly.
any 32.
Yeah, so it's just the math. Like, and I get it. So it's just like a performance thing, but like
It's not just performance, it's also people are doing things like the example I gave above where they're saying from millisecond or from seconds 101.832, and then they're, why am I getting something that's not exactly 101.832?
okay.
They're getting
Yeah, that's
101.831999 because that's what the double actually represents. And then we have to spend significant time explaining it. We have to explain the differences of you've got these constructors, but the parameter order differs based on the number of parameters you get. So the one that takes 3 is days first, the one that takes 4 is hours first. We have to get into all these complexities where you just don't have a good solution for users that is fast, correct, and accurate. And that's what these new APIs are aiming to be. They are fast, correct, and accurate, as well as usable APIs that allow users to trivially achieve success without having to worry about the problems that using double literals introduce.
did we consider using long for these? Really?
Most of them can't.
Or for from days?
So for the constructor, they're all int, which is partially why they're int here too. For some of them, like milliseconds or microseconds long might make sense. For days, it can never be a long in practice.
Right, because like where in matter it would just overflow the time
Yeah,
span.
it overflows the 2 to the power of 64 ticks that we track.
Yeah, so I threw the const in a binary representer, and it looks like it has 26 semantic bits, which means you get 2 to the 26 days before you notice any lack of precision, which is 184,000 years. So I think we're good. But technically, int.max value as an int on from days versus as a double will produce a measurably different answer. Where measurably might mean, like microseconds or something.
And this is despite like the double being exactly equal to the int. And it's just because of how we're doing the multiplication. Like
So-
obviously they have different representations, but
Right. So basically, the constant double of ticks per day is a 26-bit number times 10 to the 14.
oh, I see it.
And so we have 26 real bits, then times some other number of bits. Once that exceeds 52, some bottom bits got dropped off. And then we had to shift the scale of the number up. And so that's where the problems come in. But yeah,
Okay,
so
yeah.
I think no human will ever see, like, no real input to this will see a problem. And if there's a maximum value that we store, I would not be surprised that it's less than 184,000 years. for anybody who cares, it's really 183,734 years. All right.
So the argument really comes down to the people who are writing like 1.82 or something.
Well, they won't change. It's the people who wrote from days 1, close parenthesis, because that'll change from days 1 as a double to from days 1 as an int, which will change, or possibly change, what the math that goes on in the back, depending on what Tanner writes behind these functions.
Well, I'm guessing I'm saying the argument for adding this API is not so much for the precision at the margins, right? Like, because at the point it doesn't make a difference.
Right. So it's
a very huge value.
It's to let the people who wrote 101.832 to change their code to put a comma there and get the answer they meant.
Right. And for the people who just automatically start using it when they recompile, fine. Like, it shouldn't be any slower.
Yeah, and I agree now with the various edge cases. Again, I think it's about 184,000 years, meaning you were trying to find this error. No sensible input into from days will, because it's unless this is twice as big as it should be, it's that many days is when you first encounter a precision error. Which is a lot.
Like, I mean, it might happen with certain multiplication, but again, like, why do you need to represent that many years, like, in real life? So yeah.
People do all kinds of stuff. It's better to not ask why.
Yeah.
Fair enough.
So
maybe they'll divide it.
Yeah. So our general guideline for defaulted parameters is once you have boundary case 2, if I don't remember if it's greater than or equal to 2, that you have a simplified overload that has no defaulted parameters. So this would just mean we get from days, int days, close parenthesis, plus this one, etc. And then presumably,
that's fine with me.
Presumably, you can even optimize that method because it won't need the stack spill of the extra 7 parameters. So.
Oh yeah, although the implementation is simple enough, with all of them being constant 0, the JIT would already optimize it down to inlining and then dropping all of the 0 cases.
Fair enough.
If we really thought the lack of precision was significant, we could do 2 extra conditions in the from days logic to check if it's in the range where an int would be better. Do the conversion ourselves. No, I'm just kidding, obviously.
As long as you're passing a literal, the JIT will float away. I guess I can just doodle this over here.
So no consideration for making from milliseconds along. Or from microseconds.
I think that one's to you, Tanner.
So I think max seconds, milliseconds, and microseconds can all be more than 32 bits, but let me double check real quick. Actually, it might just be microseconds and milliseconds. Because it's 600 million ticks per minute. So 63 minus 1. Okay, so minutes and below would need to be long if we want to theoretically allow them to be any range. That's valid for them.
Yeah, not even from seconds maxes out or overflows, right? With the
yeah,
that max value.
Because minutes is 33 bits. Whereas hours is 27.9.
Weird that SharpPipe can't run that one.
Wait, from minutes int max value doesn't overflow either. Only from
right,
hours.
I said minutes.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, I said minutes and below.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah. Minutes is 33 bits. It's just at that boundary.
Why do math when you can have a computer do it for you? So, seconds can exceed an int, and seconds and an hours can't. Yeah, there's a number in between them. Should still be true false, but yeah, that's how I did my testing. There we go.
I just called from hours and waited for the overflow exception.
Fair enough.
From hours int max value.
Okay, so does that mean we want minutes and below to be only long or to be overloaded to also be long?
I think only because we have to internally cast it to long anyways, so there's no real benefit to only letting it be int.
So that.
And then microseconds would be long in the defaultable parameters. So all of the defaultable parameters that aren't hours and that isn't hours would be long.
But that's not what we take in the constructor.
Right, but the constructor has other issues as well. For example, the constructor has overloads where the same typed parameter in the same position does not mean the same thing across overloads.
Wunderbar. Okay, so do we want to change minutes, seconds, milliseconds, and microseconds in all of their parameter positions, and not just as the lead one?
But
yeah, because there's no
Yeah, like why isn't it capped to like 1000 or 60 on the rest, and why is the long necessary? Like,
Because
am I missing something?
we allow users to specify more minutes and more seconds than 0 to 60, because you can specify like 120 seconds and 1 minute, and that ends up equating to a total of 3 minutes, and people do that for reasons, but they do.
I mean, we could
honestly,
disallow it.
I mean, that honestly sounds
but
a bit weird to me, but
it's more complicated to block it than it is to allow it.
Yeah.
So like currently in the constructor we allow it, but these are new. But I guess for consistency.
Right. Well, and even with these being new, we still want to allow it from a performance perspective.
Yeah, that's fair.
There's nothing logically wrong with 180 seconds.
So presumably you also allow negative seconds?
Yep. And it's much faster to do it that way, because then you only have to consider overflow at the end. You don't have to check each parameter individually.
Okay, I want 600,000 days and negative 6 trillion microseconds. Go. Whatever. I mean, it would look... I would want to smack somebody upside the head if they wrote it as a literal, but I guess if the math works out to do that way. Certainly it's better than, oh, I need to subtract 90 seconds from this. Oh no, I need to roll the minutes back. Oh no, I need to roll the hours back. Like, it probably makes a lot of sense in code, but yeah, looking at it as if somebody writes timespan from days 1 comma negative 3 comma a million, you'd be like, what are you doing?
That's fair, but yeah, I think as a general rule of API design, like, don't be too restrictive in inputs as long as like what it would do is obvious.
Right. If it was representing a time code and just storing all these as properties, then it would make sense to be like, look, we would never return back a time code that had a long number of minutes. So, no, minutes is capped between 0 and 59 inclusive. But as just being math of we're going to just add all these things together as if you did from days plus from hours plus from minutes, then yeah, who cares? And then int to long, we used to care back in the 90s because of register width. Do we just not care anymore? Or are you just assuming that the JIT's going to eat all this anyway?
The JIT's going to eat it all anyways, and this is a case where most machines are 64-bit. There are still some that are doing 32-bit, of course, but timespan itself is 64 bits under the covers. So we fundamentally have to upcast all of these to int anyways, or to too long anyways.
Right. But if for some reason we end up with a non-inlineable call, which I think would only be the reflection call, there's a question of how big the stack spill is, but I don't really care.
It would end up spilling twice as many bits in that case.
All right.
But that's going to be like, you're doing something weird. You're doing a reflection call or a delegate, or you're caching a delegate.
And I changed long. All right. Anything else? I don't think I missed anything in chat, but if I did, I apologize. Boink. Okay.
I can nominate one. Yep, that's the one.
So add a remove method to priority queue 903-925.
Yeah, so we shipped the PriorityQueue class back in .NET 6, and at the time we really made the explicit decision to not use a design, rather a heap implementation that supports priority updates. The reason for that is that it would add performance overhead for what seemed to be very limited uses for priority updates. So this issue is, I'm guessing, trying to address a pragmatic concern that comes with certain uses of this class. And it specifically comes from the realm of education and coding interviews. Humor me. But essentially, we've had many requests from users saying that, oh, shoot, I can't use C# in my lead code because I want to implement Dijkstra, and there's no way in hell that I can use a priority queue with priority updates on hand, which is an essential ingredient to have Dijkstra-like graph algorithms implemented. In most priority queue implementations in other platforms, including C++, Java, and Python, they use the exact same underlying array heap implementation. But it's actually possible to get support for priority updates using a linear time remove method. So what that linear time remove method is doing is essentially what the description suggests. It's simply scanning the entire heap until it finds an element that matches what you're looking for and removes it from the heap while preserving the heap property. So effectively, this is just a request to add a remove method to make it possible for people to just encode priority updates.
Would we go further? Would we like have a update method, earning queue or update method, like you show in the API usage, actually just on the API?
Absolutely not, I would say, because if we put in something that we call update explicitly, we might be inviting people to implement Dijkstra for inputs that are larger than, I don't know, 10 nodes. And, then you would get like a quadratic time implementation, which, it might get you a job at one of the big tech firms, but it wouldn't work in production. So it's mostly kind of like an accelerator for people wanting to learn when they're students in C# or people wanting to do lead code.
Yeah, I hear you. So you say all the other languages with like priority queues use the array heap. Like, do they have a remove API?
Yeah.
And so, with no equality comparer, you're doing basically equal. So reference equality for.
It would be using.
Or no, sorry, it'd be using a quality compare default. So if they define a dot equals, it'll call that. Otherwise, it's reference equals for a class and element wise value equals for the structs.
And for clarity, the reason why it needs to be in the method is that the heap itself doesn't have a notion of element equality comparison. It's agnostic to that concept, which is why you would need to pass it to that method.
Yep. Um, should it also out the element it matched?
I thought about it, and I was like, if you really want to get the actual value, then probably just pass in a reference equality compare. No, actually, that I'm wrong, but I figured that, I don't know, why would you want to do that?
I mean, but you don't want anybody to call the method in the first place.
I mean, I want people calling the method understand what it's doing, and I'm hoping that documentation would adequately explain what it is doing and the performance ramifications. Now, in terms of whether we want to return the actual element, the equality comparison that you're passing isn't enough. You want to actually get your hands on the actual element that was on the heap. Maybe there's a use case for that, but
Right.
I just felt it was too ugly.
Right, because here's a stupid scenario that you could do with this, right? So you have a priority queue. It has some elements, and one of the properties that the elements have is what time was they're representing a set of jobs to do, and it's what time was the job entered. Once there's this remove, you could now make an equality comparer that isn't an equality comparer. It's in fact an inequality comparer that lies, and you say, give me. I'm gonna remove anything whose timestamp is older than 20 minutes ago, and that you just keep calling remove until it returns false. Well, you can't log what job just got canceled because you don't know. You just know it said it removed something. So I think that's the case where you would then want an overload that outs the value as well.
So in the other languages, do they separate the element and priority in the same way and return just the priority in their respective remove
I
methods?
believe that's only the case in C++. In Java, it only takes one thing, and that one thing is comparable, so there's no separate priority. And I believe the same is the case for the Python one, although I need to check.
Yeah,
But I just know
I
that
kind of agree with Jeremy.
the other removes that we've done, we've started with the why would anyone want to know, and then we've lately added the overload that gives here's the thing that matched that we removed, because people come up with a scenario. And we can do it as two overloads, or we can just do it as the one method, and they can out underscore the parts they don't care about.
Yeah, I mean, I don't care enough. I mean, yeah, why not?
Yep, and then
Could we out
should
it
it be
as
a
a tuple?
should it be a try remove?
So iCollection uses remove and returns bool, so I
Okay.
use that.
Why would you add a tuple?
So we use tuples in a couple. Well, the enqueue methods don't take a tuple, so never mind.
Does T priority need to be nullable or anything, or so when it's false, is it just
Yeah, I was gonna say I assume these should say maybe null.
Yeah.
Or
yeah.
maybe null when false or something.
Yeah.
What is the name of that? Maybe null when, or maybe spelled wrong. Okay.
One thing worth mentioning is that when there's two equal elements in the heap, what actually ends up being removed is going to be non-deterministic.
Yep. And Yeah, and since you're not doing any comparison on the priority, you can't even. I guess, would you have any assertion that it would be with a higher or lower priority, or is it just completely?
No.
Okay.
No. In most cases that I would assume that most cases that use this, they would typically have some guarantee of uniqueness within the heap. Although we can't enforce that internally, it would have to be forced by the algorithm using it. Like, for example, in Dijkstra, you can't have the same node occur multiple times in the heap. That would be corrupting it. Do we need to rename the priority parameter as removed priority for symmetry?
I mean, do we even need to call the thing removed element?
Well, we can't call it element.
Oh,
Like,
sorry.
that one's taken.
Yeah, no, fair enough. Fair enough. Fair enough.
We could call the first parameter a search element and then call the out parameter element. I don't know.
I mean, we could do that. Yeah. I actually like that a little better almost. It's close.
Yeah, I mean, if this was personal API, I'd call that needle, but you know,
Yeah. This has
we're
come
not
up
cool.
in API review.
We're not cool
before.
enough to do that.
Yeah, I remember you making that comment.
Yeah, I'm not sure how I feel about search element. I know I proposed it, but kind of rubs me the wrong way now that I see it.
What have we recently added? The what got removed to, like hash set? No, hash set remove doesn't out the value.
Make it a ref and swap it if you find it. I'm just kidding.
Could we feasibly out a tuple, as mentioned before, or is that complicating things?
Well, the general API guideline is you can return a tuple, but you can never have a tuple in your parameter list.
Yeah.
And then, never has an asterisk like all nevers do.
I think I'd probably go back to the way we had it before, so.
With removed priority.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think.
Yeah, I mean, because really it's removed
either.
element and removed element priority. And because removed priority feels weird. I feel.
Because there are other things that could have that priority.
Yeah, I mean, there's also, this. Element to remove. But then it's weird that we have to remove an element.
With a preposition.
Right.
So
element, matched element.
Or it was originally removed element.
Removed element.
Match.
And
meh, priority. Keep it priority.
Okay.
Because that just feels wrong. And even I think that's too wordy. And that tells you something.
Everyone has their limits.
So remove element, I would say removed element and a priority. And that's nullishly. Chat says matched priority sounded nice. We only had on screen matched element, but
Let's keep it
Priority
consistent.
is unambiguous here.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think priority's good enough. Alright.
Have we considered using key value pair for the out?
We generally, like PriorityQueue ended up using tuples everywhere. So adding key value pair for this one.
Where are we exposing these as tuples currently?
I
It
can check.
looks like in queue range takes it as a tuple.
Also, the collection that you can enumerate is also an I collection of, or I read-only collection of tuples.
All right, hold up. Because this is interesting. Like, if you're taking a value tuple, I'm assuming it's a value tuple. Is it?
Yep.
Yeah, as a.
But we never take it as an
normal, like-
element. We only take it as an I enumerable.
Okay, but I'm just saying, like, that would be a reason. Like, if you're taking it in other parts of the API as a normal parameter to out it, I would say.
Right. But you would have to, like, you couldn't get this tuple and then pass it back in because there's no in queue that takes the tuple. You'd have to deconstruct it into two locals or wrap it in a, like, I don't know if we even have a link value to like .as sequence. Be like, enumerable dot wrap of the.
We could
tuple
add
that you
in
got
queue
back.
tuple while we're at it. It's just one more method. Like, we could.
We
It's
can't.
not-
Again, the guidelines we have on value on when you can use tuples is they are never acceptable in as a named element of a signature.
Right, but
Asterisk.
I think, like,
Because
reasonable people.
this is the correct signature for this. Wrapping this in an extra set of parentheses is weird.
Yeah.
All right. But if we did have the in-queue, I think that would be definitely defensible. But I hear your point that just don't add the in-queue to begin with.
All right. Bloop. Why do you not have a... What's the bucket on this? Collections?
Yeah. Did I not add one?
It didn't have one, and the bot didn't make one.
Thank you.
I was looking at it like, this is the wrong number of labels. So... Still don't have Steve or Emo, who I really wanted to talk
Christoph
about.
has an issue in the list, and Christoph is here, so
Do I?
yeah. First time I see that one as well.
Okay, add JsonSerializerOptions.web for JsonSerializerOptions 902181.
This one is mine.
You probably marked it ready for review, I think.
You marked it ready for review.
Yeah, like
You-
this is just a matching API for the other place that we have the .web. So basically, we expose the options. It's like very simple API. It's like I don't know what to say about it.
Where's the other place we called it web?
I believe it's in the comment below. Yeah,
Jason
I think that was my.
serialized defaults. Yeah, I thought we already had this. So I guess I was just using Jason serializer defaults.
We have an enum, so you need to explicitly pass an instance to the options constructor, and this basically gives you a singleton that you can use instead.
So why didn't we just do this when we added default to JsonSerializerOptions the first time is my only question.
Lost in the mists of time, I would guess.
All right, no, makes sense to me.
Well, I think with the constructor, you're saying start with the defaults and you can customize it. And this
Yeah.
is going to be this one's going to be pre-frozen.
Pre-frozen, yeah.
A lot of people do it though, but that's fair. I guess the argument would be for web scenarios, you should be using DI, where it can be more configured to the app, but like
No one
not
should be
everyone
using
wants
DI
that.
ever.
Yeah, I mean, some people just want the camel case and stuff, and like.
But yeah, like I feel like the thing that came up when we were talking about this before is we asked about the singletons, and it was like, well, the enum's more flexible because then they can start with that and then customize it, and then I guess now we're just seeing a lot of people asking, why do I have to say new? Plus, if they say new every time, it has to refreeze it every time. So
Yeah, I say we approve it.
seems good to me.
If we were fine with the singleton for default, I think web makes sense too.
Yeah, I guess the real question is when we got around to adding the default singleton, why didn't we add the web singleton? I think I know why we added the enum, but I don't know why we added the singletons inconsistently.
I might have some reservations about the name web, because it makes sense to call the default because it is the default instance.
So web defaults?
Web defaults, I don't know, am I making things worse by...
Yes, I don't think it's confusing. I mean, it's obviously a default. It's like a static thing on JsonSerializerOptions.
Like, how many things do we have of static on the serializer options?
Not many. I think default is the only one.
Because the other name I can think of it, which would search nice when I type dot, would be like default web, but that sounds weird.
Looks like emo doesn't paint statics as different, so I'd have to click every single thing.
I don't hate default web, but I do think it's making things worse. I think web is fine. I think it's pretty clear. And it aligns better with the JsonSerializer defaults, which I understand is different because of its name, but still.
It's not bad, web defaults.
My order of preference is web default, web default.
Mine is whichever search is easier. So like if I type like JsonSerializer dot, I would expect to. When I start typing default, I would prefer to see all of the defaults, I guess.
My vote's for web defaults.
I agree with Eirik.
Yeah, I agree that like if we're gonna add anything to web, you should put default first. Though to be fair, Copilot's just gonna end up recommending it most of the time, whatever it is.
It definitely will make it more discoverable. Like if you make it just web, you either know about it or not.
I mean, I'm not so sure about that. I'm pretty sure this is the only other static thing on it other than
for
defaults.
now.
I'm personally fine with web and defaults for web, but or default web, like whichever of the last three. The first one is just like you add more words, I guess.
Yeah, web defaults is my least favorite.
I thought you said
defaults for web might be my least favorite just because of the form.
I thought you said web defaults you thought was good, so I moved it up.
No. My second after web is default web because at least it does show up the other thing. If we do add more properties.
Because I think looking at the code as written here, like web defaults reads the nicest, but default
Over
web and yeah, this feels like an incomplete sentence to me.
No, those are your web options.
Like, because web feels like a verb there.
It usually a web. How does it feel like a verb? It's like
But to be fair, there is only a single static, which is called default for now.
I'm just like looking at it here. My brain says web is a verb, and I need and it feels like a transitive verb, and I need the affected object.
I'm not
web is like super
native
noun.
speaker. I'm not native speaker. It's
Yeah.
To me, it sounds like a noun. How do you pronounce it?
A noun, yeah. It's definitely a noun.
Well, it's also
Like
a noun.
spider web. It's definitely a noun.
But
web is
Spider-Man
really a
goes
verb.
around webbing bad guys.
Oh my god, that's like the only way. Sorry, I shouldn't have said that.
No. But like that when I read this line of code, like my brain, I hear myself thinking JsonSerializerOptions.web, and then it says, well, the thing after dot is a verb usually, and then my brain's like, web what? And if it says web defaults, then it's like, oh yeah, that was a noun phrase.
Save everyone just the typing and call it web. It's
yeah. Web sounds good, and especially there's only just default. That's the single static we have right now, so it seems like.
I agree. Web is fine for symmetry, but once somebody was asking, this is, I think, currently my preferred order, top down. But so web it is. Well, thank you, people in chat who agree with me that web defaults is better, but I admit that I've lost. Feel free to
it'll be okay.
To raise some rabble on the issue and get him to come back with the other name. Okay. Yeah, we still got 20-something minutes.
No one has another suggestion than the math float vectorized functions.
All right, so issue 9er3513, and
so
what are we doing?
So the general premise here is we on float and double, we have a number of math APIs that work on scalars. So those are things like cosine, sine, log, exponent, etc. With the new tensor primitives out of band package, we also have APIs that do those same operations over spans of t, particularly float for the .NET 8 out of band, and then also for .NET 9 in the future, we'll be expanding that to other types like double, half, etc. In order to support that functionality in tensor primitives, we end up having to implement all of these functions anyways. So we end up implementing these same operations over vector 64, vector 128, vector 256. That way we can accelerate them at the hardware level as a core vectorized primitive. So the proposal here, which is notably from Alexandre from Unity, because Unity would also like us to provide this, so that when they do finish the migration, they're able to utilize these same functions and get off of their in-house versions. So it's exposing all those same APIs on vector 64, 128, 256, and 512, rather than keeping them as internal only.
Okay.
And so it's same signatures that we have, just instead of taking a float, returning a float, they take in the vector 64 float and return vector 64 float, and then there's parity with double.
And I assume the purpose of this comment is to say, let's pretend we put the interface on the type, which we won't because it can hold non-floating point types. But if we could say vector 64 of float had interfaces that vector 64 of int didn't, it would have this, and it would look like these.
Correct.
Okay. So, assuming everything is named correctly, like, did we really call those X? We did.
Yep.
Okay.
Same as we had the discussion like a month ago for tensor primitives.
That tells you how confident we were that X was the right answer. That we keep asking, did we really name it X? And then I looked up that one of like, did we really call those sin p and cos p? Yes, I'm aware that they're sine pi and cos pi, but
we were ahead of Elon Musk. Taking our name.
It's true. We have prior art. Let's go start the IP battle. And for the hearing impaired, I was shaking my head no. Okay. No, for the visually impaired. The hearing impaired don't need audio commentary. All right. So is there anything not pattern matchy?
Nope. Everything is something that we've already exposed, where we've had the name, the parameter, the function name, and the parameter name immortalized in the generic math interfaces. And so it's just support float, support double for all of them. At the very bottom of this list, there's a few additional methods where we support them for any type. So integers as well, because logically they work well for integers, like clamp and copy sign. Similarly, max number, which behaves identically to max, but allows you to utilize it to pick the right behavior in a generic context.
Okay. Are there any interfaces that are not fully implemented?
We're not implementing any interfaces here in practice because...
Are there any interfaces that are not being logically fully implemented while not being declared as being implemented? So, did you leave off anything off of iFloating point?
Not for iFloating point. For iNumber, yes, because that doesn't include APIs like create checked, create truncating, create saturating. Those logically make sense for scalars, but not for vectors. We don't have APIs like we don't have the parsing and formatting APIs. There's a discussion at the very bottom of this on whether we want to support some of the is query APIs, so like is infinite or is nan or is number. Those would be handled in a separate proposal if we do want to handle them, and they would, like our other vector comparison APIs, like vector 128 greater than, they would return a vector of t, where each t is either all bit set or 0 depending on true or false, so it can be used in masking operations. But those were left to a future and separate discussion.
So you said we're not implementing the interfaces in practice this release, and I was actually kind of interested in the reasoning for that. I didn't know.
So for vector like five, so vector 512 as a class is a static class, which these additional methods are provided on because they only make sense for some t. So specifically floating point types. We theoretically could expose something like cosine for integer, and we could give it a well-defined behavior, such as explicitly truncating, like converting up to float, doing the operation, then truncating back to integer for the result. But that's not practical for many scenarios, and we don't have a way to utilize the vector types from a generic context today. That is, you can't have something like where t is an ISIMD vector of t self t element. So it's not beneficial to implement those interfaces either from that context.
What are vector 2? You're adding a bunch of pre-canned values, which I assume is that value copied in both positions.
Yep, which is the same as it works for 1 and all bit set, and I think there's another one we expose as well. But since vector of 2 is only float, these can logically be exposed, whereas they couldn't be exposed for vector 512, for example, because what would vector 512 of int.py mean?
Mm-hmm. And similar for vectors 3 and 4.
Yeah, notably those wouldn't be where t is unmanaged. That was a copy paste error, since those are just straight up float non-generic.
So you did it for float and double. Do these vector types support half? Is that missing?
Not today.
Okay.
If we add support for half in the future, and we probably will, we would end up expanding these to support half as well.
And we don't have quad, right?
Right.
Okay.
And if we ever exposed quad, I bet we'd have the discussion on, should we call it quad? Should we call it float 128?
Sure. But
yeah.
how much patience do I have to do this? None. Okay. I said modular. That makes everything okay. And Mr. Snarky Kevin, we didn't do it in 20 minutes. We did it in 10.
There's another issue which I didn't
Just
touch
goes
on
to show
because I
how
thought it
thorough
would
we
take
are.
us more.
All right.
The other one that I skipped over is the alternative rounding modes for division, which is fun, and that may or may not take more than 10 minutes.
Just based on the title, I feel like I'd want Steve or Emo here for that.
The general premise behind it is the remainder operation we exposed today is remainder of truncating division, which doesn't have which doesn't follow modulus when the signs of the numerator and denominator differ. And so the proposal is we expose the other functions as some other languages like Rust are doing. That way people can choose things like remainder of Euclidean division or remainder of flooring division, which is the one most people think of as mod. So it's going to be a fun issue.
Yeah, because I can certainly say it would never occur to me that division floor is what will give me mod. Because I feel like the current thing can give a negative answer for the remainder. Am I wrong?
Yeah.
Because mod means it's always a positive answer. So a negative number mod
Yes, and
a positive number, which is the only time it makes sense to really be mod, should have to be a positive number. And I don't know that this would be like and force it to be positive. So I think there's a
that's
long
where it gets
discussion in
into
that one.
Yeah. I'm pretty sure there's a long discussion, including covering the topics of what some languages use to mean rem and mod, and what rem and mod actually mean, and all kinds of and historical things. Like we named the remainder operator op modulus, which technically doesn't make sense, but that's what it is for historical reasons. So there's all kinds of fun there.
Fair enough. All right, let's. I think the last one we will attempt to look at, though we may decide we're not going to look at it, is StringBuilder replace old new index count 77837. StringBuilder.replace. Okay, so we currently have wonderful. All right, so we have replace string string and string string int int, and then char char and char char int int. And then this is, instead of string, let me do a read only span. So if I'm doing a substring, I don't have to allocate the substring. This seems fine to me. Given that it's just spanifying an existing string overload. Oh, I see. Replace hello with dear. Okay. Any pushback, including somebody saying we should defer it to when more or specific people are in the room? Sounds sold to me. Alright. Overload with start index and count with spam parameters is confusing. Alright, where's the docs on this guy? Yeah, so I'm pretty sure the start index and count are basically only slicing the replacement range inside the string builder, and since it's exactly an overload of existing things, I don't think there's anything we can add to the names that makes them more clear that doesn't make them a paragraph long. Like start index within the current string builder and count after the start index within the current string builder.
Yeah, I mean, if anything, we should improve the dot comments, but
Right.
I think the names are good enough.
Yeah, because
Stay consistent.
where the substring begins, like really, this is defining the search space within the string builder. It's not substringing either old or new value. So. Bloop. And all right. Yes, I agree. Count does sound like it might be the maximum number of replacements, but since it is just overloading an existing thing, I think keeping the parameter names is the smartest thing to do. And cool. All right, since there's not really such a thing as a 5-minute issue, and we've been just trying to slam down easy ones anyway, I think we're going to go ahead and call it here. So we're still not doing Thursdays, right? So we will see people back here on, I think that's Halloween. Halloween's the 31st. So where we will undoubtedly not have a theme day for our on Halloween but not Halloweeny .NET API review. So thanks everyone for joining us, and we'll see you at our same .NET time on our same .NET channel. Auf Wiedersehen.
Bye bye.